Hello and welcome to a new Google Sheets video in Practical Sheets. Actually, it's more than Google Sheets, Google Apps Script, web apps, HTML, the whole works. So today we're going to create a small web app that has dependent dropdowns. So it's very easy for you to select one category and then another subcategory. Let's see it in action. So this is what we're going to create. We have a simple form with 3 fields. We're going to have an email address, and then we can have a make. We're going to have a list of cars, and then I can select, for example, Aston Martin. And as soon as I select Aston Martin, I have all the models of Aston Martin. Or if I then select Acura, then I have all the models of Acura. And then if I click submit, then I go to my dependent dropdown and I have it here. To my sheet and I have it here. It seems simpler than it is. It's not that complicated, but you know me, I like to explain it step by step, so it will be a bit of a long video. If you know somewhat about web apps, then you can skip more or less to the half of the video, where then we start talking about the dropdowns, because I will create it from scratch as always. So thank you for watching. Special thanks to my Patreons. Without them, this is not possible. So thanks a lot. And if you want to download this and more than 100 templates of the videos in the channel, you can go to the Patreon page. You can also ask me any question about the code. Without further ado, so let's begin. This may be a bit of a long video. There are a lot of things to cover. Maybe I will go a bit fast in some of the concepts. There are some basic web app videos in the channel. So let's not waste any more time. We're going to create a file, sheets.new. Just a caveat or a note, I created a sheet because it's easier for me to, first, because I will connect to a database in Sheet, and secondly, because to share with the Patreons, it's easier for me to do it in Sheet. But this doesn't mean that you can create a web app just doing script.new and create a new standalone Google Apps Script. This could also be done, okay? But we're going to do it in Sheet just for my convenience and my Patreon's convenience. Okay, so let's call this dependent dropdown web app. Here I only need 2 sheets. Let's set them up immediately. I'm going to paste from one of my other videos a list of categories, in this case car makes and models and years. I don't think we're going to use years, but make and model we are, okay? And this is almost 600, so this is a lot, 6,800, so that you can also see the speed and how can we do it, and how working with arrays is much more quicker in all senses. That one of the complaints, for example, of doing dropdowns in sheets or in even forms, is that there is a limit, 500 items per list. Here we are not going to have the limit, okay, and among other advantages. So this we're going to call this dropdown data, and another one just for the data. Let's say this is a list, a database for interested in buying used cars. So I'm going to need 3 things: email, make, and model. That's it. Okay, and we're going to have all of my forms bringing the data here. I think we don't need to do anything else in the sheets. We're going directly to our app script. So we're going to create a web app. To create a web app, we need one basic thing, but in my case, in more complex web apps, we're going to need 2 things. The first thing we're going to need is a function called doGet. Inside my doGet, I'm going to need an HTML object. We create this HTML object with the HTML service. There are various ways of doing it. We're going to do it today with the create HTML output from file. So this is the second thing we're going to need, a file, an HTML file that we can call however you want. We're going to be very creative and call it form. And then we're going to return this HTML object. So this is not going to work because I don't have any HTML called form. So in Google Apps Script, we can create 2 types of files: the code file, the JS files, and the HTMLs. So we're going to create HTML that should be called this same way, form. And for now, we're just going to do a test. Save. Let's give a name to the project. We're going to deploy click in deploy, new deployment. In type, we're going to select web app. We don't need to give a description. For now that we're going to do testing and development, you can leave this as it is. You are the ones that execute it, and you are the ones that have access. When you're going to deploy to share with more people, then you will change this to anyone. So let's do deploy. Given that we are not connecting to Sheet just yet, it's not going to ask us for any permission. So let's go to our web app with this URL, and we have our test. Okay, this top bar, there's a couple of ways of removing it. We could do a video in the future. We could embed this in a WordPress, embed this in a Google site. We could use directly Workspace. There are 3 or 4 ways of removing this, but we are not going to cover this topic today. One other thing before we begin doing our functionality on our form is that if I do any change here and I do test2 and save it and refresh it, I'm not going to see the change. Why? Because this is the deployment. When I did deploy new deployment, did a photo. This is what happens with software. You do everything and then you deploy it. In AppSheet is the same. But even if you do changes, if you don't deploy the changes, then you won't see it. So you need to deploy it again. If I wanted to see the test2, then I will have to go here to deploy, manage deployments, and create a new version, or alternatively create a new deployment. But the thing with the new deployment is that it will be a new URL. In the case of managed deployment, we will just update this URL. So if I go to manage deployment, and then I go to this pencil and I click new version, and I could say here I changed the title, and then I click deploy and click done, and then I update my URL, and I will have test2. But imagine having to do that every time you do one little change. That we're going to do it a lot during the video and during your programming and development. So the best thing here is what is called a test deployment. So we click on test deployment, we use this URL, and this is the URL we're going to use right now. So if I change this for test3, sorry, I forgot to save, and then I refresh, then I have it here. But in the deployed version, it will always remain 2 until I deploy it again. Okay, just a quick note, but very important to know. So how does this work? Okay, so here now we're going to work in our HTML. HTML, we could program it from scratch, but there are things called frameworks that will help our development be quicker. So I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com, and I'm going to copy the second part that is just the HTML that I have to do. The good thing about this second and not this first one is that I already have a CSS link and a JavaScript link. This in practical terms means that I don't have to worry about formatting, and I don't have to worry about any functionalities that all of the elements of Bootstrap may have. So I recommend that you copy from the beginning this code. So we're going to replace our HTML for this, and we could do the tests here again. And now that we're here, we're going to, inside our body, if you don't know HTML is no more than a series of tags, one inside the other. That's it. It's a hierarchy system that all the web pages in the world work with HTML, as far as I know. So then we're going to do div. Div is like the main sections of our web page, or containers are called divs. And the divs work with attributes. The tags in HTML work with attributes. For example, this is an attribute, this is an attribute, this is an attribute. So everything today we're going to work it with tags and with attributes. So to the div we're going to give a class attribute. A class attribute native to Bootstrap that is called container. This is just a way for things to look prettier, nothing more. And we almost always have to close our tags so that everything works. And one way to see if it works is to do format document. And when you see that this is indented to the right, then you know that h1 lives inside div, and this div lives inside the body. Okay, let's save and let's test it. So it looks much more nicer. Okay, now we have some margin, a better looking font, and all that. So now we're going to a form, because this is what we want to do today, a form where I can collect the email, the make, and the model. So we go here to our forms. This is the nice thing of Bootstrap and these frameworks, that it has a lot of examples, and I just can copy and paste. So this is what I want. I'm going to copy this. Well, this is not what I want, but it's I can begin with this. Here, below my H1, inside my container, I'm going to paste the form, right click, format document, so that the hierarchy is very clear. The body first, inside the body is the div, inside the div is the form, inside the form is the div, inside the div is the label, and so on and so forth. In HTML, we'll talk a lot about children and parents. This is the child of this node, and this node is the child of this tag, and this tag is the child of this tag. Going back to my Bootstrap example, I don't need this password, I don't need this check, I don't need this text. I only need the email address and the submit button. So I'm going to delete everything else. So I'm going to delete this password. I'm going to delete this checkbox. This submit button could still be called submit, and the email address could also be called email address. I'm just going to remove this email help and remove this area described by. And if I save and refresh, now I can see a very nice form. Okay, that's not working. And when I click submit, the default behavior of a form is that it goes to another, let's say another page. So I'm going to refresh, and let's fix this a bit and make this work so that when I click the email, when I write my email address, it will come here. Let's begin just with the email. The first important thing when we are going to send information is to define how we're going to send it. There are several ways to do it. One of the ways is using the ID. The ID is very important in HTML and JavaScript because it helps us identify this element and take the value, for example, that the user has typed in email, and then do anything with it. So this is why we use ID. And it's very important to use very clear variables in the ID. So we're going to call this email. This is the first thing, okay? The second thing is here in the label. The label is this. So the nice thing about the label is that when I click, it comes here. So this is why this for needs to be the same ID. So we're going to call this email, save. And when I refresh, if I click in the field or if I click in the label, it will go directly to the field. This is what this for is for. So now I'm going to send the email. How do I do this? All the functionalities of HTML go inside, or all the JavaScript goes inside a script tag. So I'm going to leave this script tag we already have just for the Bootstrap scripts, and we're going to create a new script tag. Inside this script tag, we're going to create a function that will send this email and all the data that we have in our form to Google Apps Script. So the flow works like this. This is HTML. HTML sends the variables. When I click submit, we'll send it to my JavaScript. That is this script tag. Here it will work with all of the functions that it has. This, we're going to write a function that will send this information to Google Apps Script. And then Google Apps Script will take this information and connect with Google Sheets to send it to Sheets. So HTML to JavaScript to Google Apps Script to Sheets. More or less it works like that, okay? So let's write a function that will take the email and send it to my Google Apps Script. We're going to call this function send data to Google Apps Script, JAS. And I'm going to receive the data from this form or from any form, but in this case, I'm going to call it so that this form is the one that sends the information. I need to do two things here. The first thing is that I'm going to prevent, remember that when I hit submit, it will go to another page. I want to prevent this. So we do this with event.prevent default. Another note here is that you can see that when I write code in Google Apps Script, it will help me a lot. It has a lot of autocomplete functionality. Here in apps, in HTML, not so much. So I recommend you have a code editor such as Visual Studio Code or any other to write the HTML, because it reduces the chances that you make a lot of errors. This is the first thing we're going to do. The second thing we're going to do is to send this form to Google Apps Script. How do we do this? With this line, google.script.run. And after the run, we're going to type dot and call a function that we will have in Google Apps Script. How do you want to call this function? However you like. The important thing is that it's called the same here and here. So let's call this send form data to sheets. I don't want to be very specific in my example to say that we're going to send the make or the model or the product, because the idea is that this will work for many different projects from your different projects. So here we're going to receive the form, and here let's copy this exactly the same. You know what? Even with the argument, and let's paste it here. So there's only one thing missing, and the thing missing, well, there are a couple of things missing. One thing is that when do I call this function? There are several ways to call this function. One that I like a lot is to, inside my form, there you can use as arguments or as attributes, you can use triggers. So when you start writing on, you can see all of the triggers that there are. Here we are going to use on submit. So the moment the form is submitted on submit, we're going to call this function, send data to Gus. Send data to Google Apps Script. And what we're going to send, which will be the form? This form. And it's very explicit to say this. Given that the form that is submitting is this, so it will know that when I write this reserved word this, it will send everything inside my form. And now that I'm sending it, what I need to do is to get this form, and the last step, to write something here. How do I do this? Spreadsheet app dot get active spreadsheet. This get active spreadsheet works because my Google Apps Script lives inside the sheets. If you were doing an independent web app, then you will need to use open by ID or open by URL. Okay, the rest will remain the same. I will hit dot and then get sheet by name, because we need to connect with the sheet where I want to write the data, that in this case is called data. And finally, now that I'm in that sheet, I'm going to use, there are several methods to use. We're going to use append row this time, and append row receives an array of all the elements we want to include in the row. In this case, there's only one element. There's one thing missing, and is that when I'm going to send forms, I need to have an attribute called name. Normally, in most cases, I use the same name of the ID for the name. So let's call this email. This means that when the form is submitted, is sent, it will be an object. This element object will contain all the names inside my form. In this case, I only have one name that is called email. So I will do here form.email, and in theory, this will write my email here. If I save and I refresh, I'm going to have an error because I haven't authorized Google Sheets. The moment I use this service, I need to have authorized. So there are just a couple of ways of doing it. One is to deploy it again. Another one is just to run the doGet function. Here it will ask for our permissions. Okay, now we can refresh and we can send the submit, and you can see. And let's do another one. And here it is. Okay, so it's working with just the email. So after 20 minutes of talking, finally we get to the topic of the video, that is how maybe some of you already know everything up to here. So the next thing will be now with the dropdowns. But if everything is going well, everything will be faster because I explained the basic things. So to do a dropdown, we're just going to copy this div, copy it down here, and this input, we're going to remove it, replace it for a select. That is the one we use for dropdowns. And we need to close the tag. You may have noticed that input doesn't need to be closed. There are some tags that don't need to be closed. So select. Now let's change a couple of things. For example, email, I'm going to change, this will be make. So the ID will be make, the name will be make, and what appears in the HTML will be also make. And the type, the select doesn't have a type, so I could remove it. That's it. Select, different than input, has internal elements. This is why I need to close the tag. And the internal elements are called options. So if I do here option and then write option 1, close it, I should see this would be my only option. Let's save it and let's refresh it. One thing I have missing, it's working, but I don't have the little arrow here. So for this, I need to change this form control to form select. Let's save and let's refresh it again. Now I have my little arrow on with just one option. I could just copy this and have more options. But I don't want this. I want to create my options programmatically via JavaScript, because my options, this is the second thing. The first thing is that the first connection between the web app and the sheets is that I send the information from my web app through all the flow that I showed you here. Okay, that we already did it. The second thing is that the other way around. I'm going to take the information I have here and send it to my web app so I can see it in my dropdown. This is the nice thing about this video, that we look at both directions. So we are going to create a new function that will be called create dropdown options. For now, let's leave it without an argument. And we are going to do the following. We are going to connect with our make dropdown, and we're going to start creating the options from JavaScript. How do we do this? How do we connect with an element with the ID? So I'm going to use document.getElementById. This is why what I was telling you at the beginning, that Google Apps Script doesn't help a lot programming HTML. This is why I recommend having a Visual Studio Code or something like that. I'm going to get the element that has the make ID. So in quotation, I put make, and that's it. I'm going to get the value, and we can call this dropdown because we need it later. So I store it in a variable called dropdown. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an option. How do we create an option? Also with my document, but another method that is called create element. That lets me create any tag in HTML. I'm going to create the option tag. And finally, I'm going to append this option to the dropdown. So first, let's create the option variable. And now I'm going to connect this option with this dropdown. How do we do this? With the append child method option. It should work now. However, I haven't called this function. Where should we call this option? This option should be called once the page loads, or at the beginning of the execution of the web app. So one way to do it is just to call the function here as a global function. Let's call it as a global call for the function. It's not inside any function. This is not the best practice, but it could be a first example. Let's try it just to see if it works. Apparently it worked. It created one option, but it doesn't have anything inside. So for this, I could take my option, have this text property, and call this my option. Let's save and let's refresh. Perfect. I have my option. Okay, but I don't want this to be hard-coded, but I want it, and I want to have multiple options, not just one. So I'm going to create a list of options. Just it's an array that has option 1 and option 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these 3 steps for all my elements. That could be 2 or could be 100. So let's do list dot for each of the element. I'm going to do this. So instead of my option, we're going to include the element. Let's save. Let's test it. And I have my two options, okay? I know this is baby steps, but I think it's better understood this way. Now, the final step is that I don't want this list that I created here, but the list I have here. So for this, we're going to need two things. The first thing we're going to need is to call, remember that we called Google Apps Script once to send information. Now I need to call Google to connect again with Google Apps Script, but to receive information. So we're going to use this same Google Script.run, but I'm going to use it as a global also at the beginning, google.script.run. And we're going to remember that when we do this dot, we need to use a function that lives in the Google script. So this was send form data to sheet. Now we're going to do another function called send sheet data to forms. Send sheet. I don't need any argument, and we're going to do something very similar to this. So we connect with our file. In this case, given that the script lives inside the file is get active spreadsheet, then I'm going to do get sheet by name, but not data, but drop down data. And finally, then I'm going to get all of the data it finds, all of my table. For this, there are a couple of methods. We could use get data range is the easiest one. And finally, because I don't want to, this returns a range, and I don't want a range, I want an array. So this is what we're going to do, get values. And that's it. Let's call this data array. And let's do return this data array. Normally, we are not going to need the header, depending on what you're going to do. But in this case, we don't need the header. So given that we don't need the header, we're going to do data array dot shift. So it removes the first element. That means the array. And we returned it, we send the array without the header. Let's say. Now, let's copy this function. And here in Google Script Run, let's paste the send data sheet data to forms, and this will send my array. But the question is, and now what do we do with this array? Where does it go from here? So how this works is that if this function brings data back, different from the other one we did that just send data, in this case that we are bringing data, we need another function to process it. And this will be this function we already created. For this, we need to use the with success handler method. This is the method that tells JavaScript that once this data comes, you're going to use the function inside the success handler to process the data. In our case, it will be create drop-down options. And the data it will process is the one that is returned. So if you return data array, then it will send it to this function. So let's call this data array. And we need to get to this list or something similar to this list. Given that this data array is something of a complicated array, that a bidimensional array, then we need to transform it, convert it in something more similar to this. Or easier still, instead of having to convert it. So for this, we're going to have to do a couple of steps. So we will do data array dot map. We're going to go row by row and do something with this row. What we're going to do is just access the first element in the row here, the position 0, because we need the make. So this is, let's call this list. And now we can remove this. And that's it. You don't need to do anything else in theory. Let's save. And let's try it out. Let's double check to see if our function was called. Apparently it was called. So let's see if there's an error here with F12. I'm going to remove this one over here that maybe is causing an error. Let's save and let's refresh. What may happen is that this data array is not arriving when I send it here. So the best way to treat this is we are going to use an event listener. Add event listener. Here we're going to write DOM content loaded. You see that there are many ways where you can mistype. And then comma function. And we're going to create, we could call a function that we already have created, or just create a function on the fly here. And we're going to use all these to this line that we had before. I'm going to insert it in my document as listener so that it runs only when everything is loaded. Let's save and let's try it again. Loaded. Let's save and let's try it again. Something is not working right. Here I see that the map is not working, and if the map is not working, it's because something may be in the array. So when this happens, it's good to know how to debug this. We're going to go to executions first to see if this function is being called. This is the first thing I need to see. So there's no error in the google.script.run. So apparently it is being sent. The sheet data to forms is being called. So the second thing we're going to do is to here create a logger log data array so I can see if it's sending what I wanted to send. So we're going to executions, click here, and apparently it is sending what I wanted to send. So we need to check step by step. So the first step, that is this google.script.run, is working. Then the second one is the send sheet data to forms. It's working. So the problem should be here in with success handler. So it is coming here, but something it's not working with this data array map. Let me check. Let's try to do a console log here of the data array to see if it's arriving okay. Thinking here is the problem. See, let's refresh. Here, nothing is coming to the data array for some reason. Return data array. One of the things that could happen is that maybe my data is too big. So I'm going to remove it, to copy this to another sheet. It's like 6,000. So maybe for a second part, I could see how to deal with this big data. Maybe we should do a loading or something before. So we're going to remove this. And let's try it again. Apparently it's working. Yeah, I think it was too much. So now it is working, but it's bringing the duplicates. In my case, we have a lot of duplicates, so I need to remove them. So how we're going to do it, we're going to go to our JavaScript and we're going to change the name of this. We're going to change it to list with duplicates. And then we're going to create our list variable empty list array. We're going to create an empty array called list. And what we're going to do is go through all of these items here and just remove all the duplicates. How do we do it? We're going to do list with duplicates dot for each to go through all the elements. So for each element, I'm going to see if this element is in this list. How do I do this? I'm going to say if list dot index of element equals to -1. Sorry, equals to -1. If this equals -1, then we know that it didn't find it in the list, so I could add it so that I only add it once. This is the idea of this code. So we're going to do list dot push, and we're going to push the element, and that's it. Now my list is without duplicates. We're going to save it and we're going to refresh. Excellent. Just for curiosity's sake, I'm going to take all of this and see if it works. I think it's too much data. This was the problem. Let's try it again. Yeah, it is a lot. So I will need to check what is the limit. This is my homework. For now, I'm just going to leave up until 200 or something like that. until Audi. Go down and remove it. Let's try it again. And you can see that it takes a bit to load. So one thing we could do is to have a loading message or something, but we could do this in a more advanced video. For now, we'll have our first drop down after more than half an hour video. And then I want to send this drop down here, make sure that it's arriving to my data. To hide this. So this is very easy. We just go here to code, and we're going to my append row. I'm going to put it here, and I'm going just to rearrange this so that it's more readable. Here we have email, and now I have form.make, and I think that should do it. So let's refresh. Let's put our email, and let's leave Aston Martin and submit, and go to our, and here it is. Okay, perfect. Now we have this. We just need the model to work, and that's it. So we're going to duplicate the make in my HTML, copy, paste, and replace make for model. And I'm going to, maybe this is not the best way to do it, but I'm going to duplicate this function. And we're going to do exactly the same. The thing is that we need to change a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to change is that when this data arrives, I don't want to have to ask information to Sheets all the time. I just want to ask Sheets one time for the information, because it will be too slow if I need to ask it every time, and it has to go to Google servers and connect with Google Apps Script, then go to Google Sheets, so it takes longer. So what I can do is that in the drop-down options what we could do is outside of this we can create a variable, and this is called a global variable, and we're going to create a global variable called global data array. For now it won't have anything. And what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to create a copy of my data array, and this is what I'm going to use during the whole execution of my web app. So global data array equals to data array. So I only have to ask it once to Google Sheets. The thing is that this won't work, because in arrays, this is a whole science to manage arrays. So in arrays, this is called a reference. So I want to make a real copy. For this, there are a couple of methods we could use for now, this slice method. So now we have our global data array. What this makes is that next time, I actually had copied this, I'm going to copy it again. Well, so that next time when I do this new function that is called create dependent dropdown options, I don't need any data array, because I can just call this global data array. The first time I call my drop-down options, the global data array is populated with all my data. And now I can use it every time, and it takes much less resources and it's much faster. Okay? So I'm going to do exactly the same I did here with a couple of changes. The first change is that before the map, I need to do a filter, because I'm going to filter with the make. Okay? So before the map, I'm going to do dot filter, and I'm going to do row, and row in the position 0. That is the first column, should be equals to, for now, let's do AC. Then we can make it more flexible. And that's it. And it should work. The only thing is that now my element won't be make, but will be model. And the other thing is that the map won't be in the column 0, that is this one, but the column 1, that is the model. So let's do 1. Let's save it. And how do we call these dependent drop-down options? Maybe we can call it after all of this is done. So here, I could call this. Let's save, and let's try it. So let's see. So the only thing is that I need to change this for global data array. Save it. Let's refresh. And my make is this, and my model is all that is AC. Okay, perfect. Now I need to replace this AC by whatever has been selected. So I could create here a variable called selection. I will go to document.getElementById, and I will connect to my make and get the value. And this will be my selection, and I can change this for selection. Let's save it, and let's try it. This works here with the AC, but when I change it, it won't work. Why? Because I need to include my function, my create dependent dropdown options, connected somehow when I select something here. So there are a couple of ways of doing this. We could do another of these add event listeners, so that when this is selected, then I call my function. This is one way. The other one is to call the function directly from my make. Here in select, I could call this on change trigger, and inside of it I could call my function, my create dependent dropdown options here, and that's it. Let's save and let's try it out. So the first time, given that the selection is AC, then it will be these three. But if I change it to Asia, then this should change. It hasn't changed because I need to do one additional thing. What it's doing right now, that it's adding new models. I need to first remove everything and then start adding. So before I start adding the dropdowns, I'm going to say dropdown.inner HTML equals to nothing. So easy way to erase everything. Let's try it again. So first is the AC, but if I change to Aston Martin, we have all of the Aston Martins, and if I change to Alpina, look, it's so fast because of this global variable. I don't have to keep connecting with Google Apps Script but 2 times. The first time when everything is loaded here, and the second time when I hit the submit button. No more. So this makes a much more quicker and efficient code. There are many ways in which we could make this reusable, but for now I think we've gone long enough, and I think this is working. So the last thing we're going to do is to deploy. So let's do, well, actually we need to put the model on. So let's go to code here, comma, form dot model. Let's save. Let's refresh. Let's refresh. So this A 24 and submit, and it's working perfectly. Now that we tested and it's working, we're going to deploy, manage deployments, hit this pencil, new version, and now we're going to do who has access, anyone. Let's deploy it. Copy the URL. Sorry, here, copy the web app URL. Let's go to an incognito window in Chrome. Let's paste it. Let's try it one more time. Submit it. And here it is. So it's working perfectly. There are many improvements we could make. We could do it in a further video, maybe in a course or something like that. Thank you so much, especially to my Patreons. Without them, nothing would be possible. Please let me know your suggestions, questions, and more in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe. See you next time.